The sound of pounding footsteps echoed through the ancient forest as a young princess stumbled over tangled roots, her white wedding gown torn by sharp branches and stained with streaks of mud. She could barely breathe. Every desperate gasp burned her lungs while tears blurred her vision, yet she never dared slow down. Above her, the moon hung low in the sky, glowing an unnatural crimson, bathing the forest in blood-red light. Then came the sound that made her heart nearly stop. A single howl rose from somewhere behind her, deep enough to shake the ground beneath her feet. It was answered by another, then another, until the entire forest seemed alive with voices that were hunting only one person. She looked over her shoulder, and the color drained from her face. Hundreds of glowing golden eyes stared back at her from between the trees. They were getting closer. The creatures emerged one after another, each one larger than the last. These were no ordinary wolves. Their shoulders stood higher than warhorses, their silver and black fur shimmered beneath the moonlight, and every breath escaped their mouths like smoke on a winter morning. Their claws carved deep grooves into the earth as they advanced without haste, almost as if they already knew she had nowhere left to run. The princess pushed herself harder, ignoring the pain shooting through her legs. She had been taught that wolves hunted with speed. These creatures hunted with certainty. They never rushed because they never failed. She reached the edge of a cliff and froze. Below her, crashing waves slammed against jagged rocks. Behind her, the pack slowly spread into a wide circle, cutting off every possible escape. The forest fell silent. Then every wolf lowered its head. Not in surrender. In respect. Something else had arrived. A massive shadow stepped from the darkness between the ancient trees. He was unlike anything she had ever imagined. His silver fur glowed beneath the crimson moon while black antlers rose from his head like the twisted crown of an ancient god. His golden eyes remained fixed on hers, calm, unreadable, terrifying. Every wolf moved aside without being commanded. He was their king. He stopped only a few feet away from her, and for several long seconds neither of them moved. Then his enormous body began to change. Bones shifted beneath his skin with sharp cracking sounds. His towering frame slowly straightened. Thick silver fur disappeared as though melting into the night air. Powerful paws became human hands. The antlers faded, leaving behind a magnificent black crown resting upon dark hair. Moments later, the beast was gone. Standing before her was the most striking man she had ever seen. His features were impossibly handsome, his broad shoulders wrapped in a long black cloak embroidered with silver wolves, yet his golden eyes had not changed. Those eyes still belonged to the creature that had chased her through the forest. The princess could not move. Fear rooted her to the cliff's edge as the stranger walked toward her with slow, measured steps. He stopped so close that she could feel the warmth of his breath against her trembling face. Raising one hand, he gently brushed a loose strand of hair away from her eyes. His touch was unexpectedly gentle, almost tender, making her confusion even greater than her fear. For one brief moment she wondered if perhaps the nightmare was finally over. Then his thumb rested lightly against her cheek, and he spoke in a quiet voice that carried far more danger than any growl she had heard that night. "I should kill you before I fall in love." Before she could answer, everything disappeared into darkness. 3 months earlier, the kingdom of Ashbourne had celebrated peace for nearly 20 years, and nowhere in the realm was there greater joy than inside the royal palace. Musicians filled the grand halls with cheerful melodies, while servants hurried through endless preparations for the kingdom's annual moon festival. Every noble family had arrived dressed in dazzling colors, merchants filled the streets with lanterns and flowers, and children laughed as they chased one another beneath banners that stretched from one stone tower to another. To everyone watching, the kingdom looked blessed beyond measure. Yet inside the royal council chamber, hidden behind heavy oak doors, no music could be heard. Only silence remained. The king stared at a single parchment resting on the table before him. His hands trembled so violently that the royal seal slipped from his fingers. Across from him, the queen sat with tears quietly rolling down her face. Neither of them spoke. Neither wanted to say aloud what both already knew. The message had arrived just before sunrise. No messenger had delivered it. No soldier had crossed the gates. Instead, the guards had discovered an enormous silver wolf sitting silently outside the palace entrance. The beast had neither attacked nor growled. It simply waited until the captain of the guard approached before dropping a black scroll sealed with melted silver wax. Moments later, the creature disappeared into the morning mist without leaving a single footprint behind. No one dared follow it. Inside the scroll was only one sentence. The ancient promise must now be fulfilled. No signature. No explanation. Only the image of a silver wolf beneath the black crown. The king recognized it immediately. It was the forgotten crest of a kingdom no human ruler had spoken about for generations. Many believed it existed only in bedtime stories told to frighten children into obedience. Others claimed the kingdom had vanished centuries ago after its people were cursed by heaven itself. Some whispered that every full moon, travelers who wandered too deeply into the northern forests could still hear distant howls carried by the wind. Few returned. Those who did spoke of towering wolves with human eyes, castles hidden inside mountains, and a king who never seemed to age. Most dismissed those tales as fear born from exhaustion. The king had spent his entire life pretending to believe the same thing. He had lied, because his own father had once told him the truth. Long before Ashbourne became prosperous, a terrible plague had swept across the land. Crops withered overnight. Rivers dried into cracked earth. Villages disappeared without explanation. Neighboring kingdoms marched toward Ashbourne, believing its weakened people would offer little resistance. Facing certain defeat, the former king had ridden alone into the northern forest seeking help from powers no human ruler should ever approach. 3 days later, he returned with victory already promised. Within weeks, enemy armies vanished without battle. The plague ended. Rain returned. Harvests flourished again. No one questioned how such impossible fortune had arrived. They celebrated the miracle while never asking its price. Only the royal bloodline knew the truth. A bargain had been made beneath the blood moon. One day, when the wolves demanded repayment, the crown would not refuse. The present king had prayed that day would never come. Now the scroll rested before him, and the debt had finally been collected. The queen wiped away her tears before whispering the question neither of them wished to answer. Must it be her? The king closed his eyes. There is no one else. Far away, completely unaware that her future had already been decided without her knowledge, the princess laughed as she raced her favorite white horse through the palace gardens. She was unlike most royal daughters. She found little joy in endless banquets or expensive jewels. Whenever court life became too suffocating, she escaped beyond the palace walls to ride through the forests surrounding Ashbourne. The guards often begged her not to travel so close to the northern woods, especially as the full moon approached, but she rarely listened. Something about those forests always drew her back. She often claimed they felt strangely familiar, though she had never understood why. On one quiet afternoon, while wandering farther than usual, her horse suddenly stopped moving. No matter how gently she urged him forward, the animal refused. He stared into the trees ahead, ears pressed flat against his head. The princess followed his gaze. Nothing moved between the ancient trunks. No bird sang. No wind stirred the branches. Then she noticed them. 2 golden eyes watching from the darkness. A wolf stepped into the light. Unlike every terrifying tale she had ever heard, this one neither growled nor bared its teeth. It simply looked at her for several long seconds before lowering its head in what almost resembled a respectful bow. Then it turned and disappeared among the trees as silently as it had come. She smiled to herself, believing she had witnessed one of nature's rarest moments. She had no idea that every visit to those woods had been watched from beginning to end. She had no idea that the wolf who bowed before her served a king. And she had no idea that somewhere beyond the mountains, the king himself had already begun counting the days until the woman promised to him since the day she was born would finally cross into his kingdom. Engage in our comment section and tell us where in the world you're watching from. Drop your location below. And subscribe now so you never miss any of our new videos. because what happened after the princess accepted what she believed was an ordinary royal marriage would uncover a truth buried for centuries, one that would force her to choose between the family who gave her away and the king who had every reason to become her greatest enemy. The days that followed passed with unsettling speed, as though the kingdom itself wished to outrun the truth. Servants measured the princess for gowns she had never requested. Jewelers arrived with priceless necklaces and crowns that sparkled beneath the palace lights. Musicians rehearsed wedding songs from sunrise until long after sunset. Every corridor echoed with congratulations, yet not one person would answer the only question that mattered. Who is she marrying? Every time she asked, the room grew quiet. Her ladies-in-waiting lowered their eyes. Ministers suddenly remembered urgent matters elsewhere. Even the queen, who had never hidden anything from her daughter before, forced a smile that never reached her eyes before changing the subject. The silence became more frightening than any answer could have been. One evening, unable to bear the uncertainty any longer, the princess entered the royal library, believing she might discover the truth hidden within the oldest records of the kingdom. She searched through dusty shelves until she found a forgotten volume describing alliances made by kings centuries before. Several pages had been torn away. Others had been burned so thoroughly that only a single illustration remained untouched. It showed a silver wolf wearing a black crown beneath a crimson moon. Before she could examine it more closely, the royal librarian hurried into the room, gently closed the book, and insisted it was damaged beyond repair. As he carried it away, she noticed his hands were trembling. That same night, the king summoned his daughter to the council chamber. No guards stood outside the doors. No advisors waited inside. Only her father and mother remained, seated beside a table that held an unopened wedding contract sealed with black wax. For a long moment, no one spoke. Finally, the king rose from his chair and walked toward her with the slow steps of a man carrying a burden far heavier than any crown. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "you will leave Ashbourne." She searched his face, hoping to find reassurance, but all she found was sorrow. "Who is my husband?" she asked again. The king looked away before answering. "He rules farther north than any human kingdom." She frowned. "Then why has no one ever spoken of him?" The queen covered her mouth to hide a sob. The king's voice became even softer. "Because some promises survive only when forgotten." The princess stared at both of them, unable to understand. "You are giving me to a man neither of you will even name?" Her father closed his eyes. "I am giving you to the only king who can keep this kingdom alive." Those words struck harder than any slap. In that instant, she realized this marriage had never been about peace, diplomacy, or love. She was payment for a debt she had never created. She left the chamber without another word, her heart filled with disappointment unlike anything she had ever known. Throughout the night, she wandered the palace corridors she had called home since childhood, touching the stone walls, the stained glass windows, the carved wooden doors, wondering if she would ever see them again. Shortly before dawn, she climbed the highest tower overlooking the kingdom. Below her, Ashbourne still slept peacefully, unaware that its future rested upon the sacrifice of one young woman. She whispered a silent goodbye to the only life she had ever known. As the first rays of sunlight touched the horizon, horns echoed across the palace courtyard. The wedding procession had arrived. She expected foreign knights dressed in polished armor. She expected banners from distant kingdoms. She expected noble guests, royal carriages, and rows of mounted soldiers. Instead, the palace gates slowly opened to reveal absolute silence. Standing beyond them was a single black carriage unlike any she had ever seen. It carried no crest except the image of a silver wolf beneath a crown. For enormous midnight black horses pulled it without making a sound. Their eyes glowed faintly gold. There were no human guards. Instead, 12 wolves stood motionless around the carriage, each nearly the size of a bear. They neither barked nor snarled. They simply watched. Every soldier on the palace walls tightened his grip upon his weapon, yet none dared raise it. The wolves were not threatening anyone. They had come only to collect what had been promised. The wedding itself lasted only minutes. No groom stood beside her. No vows were exchanged. No rings were placed upon trembling fingers. The royal priest read ancient words from a parchment so old that parts had faded beyond recognition. When he reached the final sentence, even he hesitated before speaking it aloud. By the authority of the ancient covenant, witnessed beneath heaven and remembered beneath the blood moon, this union is sealed. The king kissed his daughter's forehead, but could not meet her eyes. The queen embraced her tightly, whispering through tears, "Whatever happens, never let your heart become harder than your fear." Before the princess could ask what those words meant, the carriage door opened by itself. The journey north lasted several days. At first the roads remained familiar, passing villages where children waved and merchants bowed respectfully as the royal carriage rolled by. But with every passing mile the landscape changed. The villages became fewer. The forests grew thicker. Even the sunlight seemed weaker beneath towering ancient trees whose branches blocked the sky. Occasionally the princess caught glimpses of wolves pacing alongside the carriage between the shadows. They never approached too closely, yet they never disappeared either. Each evening when the carriage stopped, food had already been prepared despite no servants being visible. Fresh water waited beside her tent. A fire burned brightly without anyone tending it. She began to wonder if unseen eyes watched her every movement. Once, just before dawn, she awoke after hearing footsteps outside. Pulling back the tent flap, she found no one there. Only a folded cloak rested neatly upon a nearby rock. The night air had grown bitterly cold, yet the cloak remained warm as though someone had removed it only moments earlier. On the fifth night the caravan reached the edge of the northern forest. Every driver refused to continue. Even the horses snorted nervously as though sensing something hidden beyond the trees. Without speaking, the wolves surrounding the carriage moved forward, waiting patiently. One by one, the human attendants bowed before turning back toward Ashbourne. They would travel no farther. The princess suddenly realized she was completely alone. Taking a deep breath, she stepped from the carriage and followed the wolves into the forest. The silence there felt different from any silence she had known before. No birds sang. No insects buzzed. The only sound came from leaves crunching beneath her feet and the occasional distant howl carried by the wind. Hours passed before the trees finally opened. Her breath caught. Rising from the mountainside stood a castle unlike any built by human hands. Black stone towers stretched into the clouds while silver waterfalls poured down sheer cliffs surrounding the fortress. Massive bridges connected towering spires carved directly into the mountain itself. Hundreds of banners displaying silver wolves fluttered proudly above enormous gates fashioned from dark iron. The place was magnificent, ancient, and strangely beautiful. Yet something about it felt alive. The castle seemed less like a building and more like a creature watching every visitor who entered its domain. As the gates slowly opened, the princess expected crowds of servants waiting to welcome their new queen. Instead, she found only silence once again. Elegant men and women dressed in dark clothing stood along the entrance hall, bowing respectfully as she passed. Everything appeared perfectly ordinary until one elderly servant accidentally dropped a silver tray. The loud crash echoed through the chamber. Before the princess could react, the old man's body shimmered. Within seconds, the servant was gone. In his place stood a large gray wolf staring at the fallen tray. Moments later the wolf transformed back into the same elderly servant, who calmly picked up the scattered pieces as though nothing unusual had happened. The princess froze. She looked toward another servant. Before her eyes, the young woman carrying flowers suddenly became a graceful white fox that darted across the floor before returning to human form. High above, several black ravens landed upon marble railings, only to step forward and become palace guards wearing polished armor. Every corner of the castle revealed another impossible transformation. Bears became soldiers. Hawks became messengers. Deer became musicians. The castle was filled with creatures wearing human faces. Fear settled deep within her heart. She had not married into another kingdom. She had entered another world. A dignified woman approached and introduced herself as the castle's housekeeper. Her expression remained kind, though her golden eyes revealed she, too, was no ordinary human. "His Majesty regrets he cannot greet you immediately," she said politely. "The journey has been long. Your chambers have been prepared." The princess looked around nervously. "Will I meet my husband tonight?" The woman hesitated for the briefest moment before replying, "When the king believes the time is right." That answer only deepened the mystery. Days passed before she caught even a glimpse of him. Every meal was prepared perfectly. Every request was fulfilled before she spoke it aloud. Fresh flowers appeared in her room each morning, although no servant was ever seen delivering them. Yet the king remained invisible, almost as though he deliberately stayed beyond her reach. Late one evening, curiosity overcame caution. Unable to sleep, she wandered through endless hallways illuminated by moonlight spilling through towering windows. As she rounded a corner overlooking the central courtyard, voices drifted upward from below. Hidden behind a stone pillar, she looked down and finally saw him. He stood in the courtyard, surrounded by dozens of wolves who lowered their heads as he walked among them. Even from a distance, his commanding presence silenced every creature nearby. His dark clothing moved gently with the night wind while his golden eyes reflected the rising moon. Before she could look away, he slowly turned his head toward the balcony. Their eyes met for the first time. Neither of them spoke. For several endless seconds, they simply stared at one another across the moonlit courtyard. Then he vanished. Not by walking away. Not by hiding behind a doorway. He simply disappeared into the darkness so completely that it was as though he had never been there at all. The princess stepped backward in confusion, her pulse racing. She hurried back toward her chambers, convincing herself exhaustion had played tricks on her mind. Yet as she reached her bedroom door, she noticed something resting on the table beside the window. A single white rose. Its stem still fresh. Its petals covered with tiny drops of morning dew. Even though midnight had only just begun, she slowly picked it up. Tied around the stem was a narrow strip of black ribbon. Only 4 handwritten words appeared upon it. "Do not fear me yet." She read the message again. Then a low, distant howl echoed across the mountains, followed by dozens more answering from every direction. For the first time since arriving at the castle, she realized one terrifying truth. Whatever ruled this kingdom had finally decided to acknowledge her presence. And before another moon had passed, she would come face to face with the husband everyone feared, the king whose greatest battle was not against enemies beyond his walls, but against the monster waiting beneath his own skin. The following morning, the castle felt strangely different. The servants moved with greater urgency, conversations stopped the moment the princess entered a room, and every pair of golden eyes seemed fixed on the sky instead of one another. She noticed windows being reinforced with heavy iron bars, ancient wooden doors secured with locks thicker than her arm, and soldiers quietly sharpening weapons that looked too old to belong in any modern kingdom. No one explained what was happening. When she finally asked the housekeeper whether the kingdom was preparing for war, the older woman paused before answering, "In a way, Your Majesty, yes." The princess looked around the great hall, confused. "Against whom?" The woman lowered her eyes. "Against our king." Before another question could leave her lips, the woman excused herself and disappeared into the crowded corridor, leaving the princess with far more questions than answers. As evening approached, an uneasy silence settled over the castle. Thick clouds gathered above the mountains until the last traces of sunlight disappeared. One by one, candles were extinguished throughout the halls. Guards quietly took their positions outside enormous steel doors beneath the castle, each carrying silver-tipped spears that reflected the rising moon. Curiosity once again defeated caution. Waiting until the corridors emptied, the princess slipped from her chamber and quietly followed several guards, descending a winding staircase carved deep into the mountain itself. The air grew colder with every step. Strange markings covered the stone walls, ancient symbols carved so deeply they had survived centuries. At the bottom of the staircase stood a pair of enormous black doors bound together with thick silver chains. From somewhere beyond them came a low growl that seemed to shake the walls themselves. Hidden behind a pillar, The princess watched as the guards slowly unlocked the chains. None of them spoke. Their expressions carried neither anger nor fear, only quiet sadness. When the doors finally opened, she caught her first glimpse of the chamber beyond. Massive iron pillars rose from the stone floor. Heavy chains stretched between them, each one thick enough to restrain a giant. Standing in the center of that chamber was the Wolf King. He wore no crown, no royal cloak, no weapon. Only a simple black shirt covered his broad shoulders. His wrists were already wrapped in silver restraints. Without resistance, he extended his arms while the guards secured another set of chains around his ankles and waist. The princess stared in disbelief. No prisoner willingly accepted his own imprisonment. Yet he stood perfectly still, almost relieved that the chains had been fastened. One elderly guard stepped forward and bowed deeply. "Forgive us, Your Majesty." The king gave a faint nod. "If these chains fail tonight, you already know what must be done." The old guard's eyes filled with sorrow. "We pray it never comes to that." The king looked away without replying. The guards quietly left the chamber, closing the massive doors behind them. The princess remained frozen in place. She could have returned to her room. Instead, something compelled her to stay. She pressed her ear against the cold stone just as the first howl echoed through the chamber. It was followed by the unmistakable sound of bones shifting beneath flesh. A deep cry of pain filled the underground prison. Then another. The chains rattled violently. Metal scraped against stone. The growls became louder with every passing second until they no longer sounded human. Unable to resist, she carefully pushed open the heavy door just enough to look inside. Her heart nearly stopped. The king had fallen to one knee. Every muscle in his body strained as though fighting an invisible force. His hands twisted painfully before long silver claws burst through his fingertips. His breathing became ragged. Dark veins spread across his neck. Thick silver fur slowly covered his skin while his body grew larger with terrifying speed. His spine arched backward. His jaw lengthened. The chamber echoed with the deafening sound of chains being stretched to their limits. Within moments, the handsome king she had briefly seen in the courtyard no longer existed. In his place stood the same colossal wolf that had cornered her at the cliff months earlier. His glowing eyes burned with wild hunger as he pulled violently against the chains. One after another, iron links snapped apart like brittle twigs. The princess gasped. The beast instantly stopped struggling. Its ears lifted. Slowly, very slowly, it turned toward the narrow opening in the door. Those glowing golden eyes locked onto hers. For one endless heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then the creature roared. The force of the sound threw the heavy door completely open. The princess stumbled backward, falling onto the cold stone floor. The beast lunged toward her, dragging broken chains behind its enormous body. She scrambled to her feet and ran through the dark corridors as the thunder of massive paws echoed behind her. Every instinct screamed that she would never outrun him. She reached the grand staircase just as servants rushed from nearby rooms. Panic spread instantly. Bells rang throughout the castle. Soldiers raced toward the underground chambers while shouting urgent commands. "The chains have broken," one of them cried. "Protect the queen." The princess barely understood the words before a powerful arm suddenly wrapped around her waist, pulling her into a hidden room. The housekeeper quickly shut the door and placed a heavy wooden beam across it. The older woman's breathing was uneven, but her voice remained calm. "You must stay here until dawn." The princess shook her head. "What is happening to him?" The housekeeper closed her eyes. "The curse has awakened." Before she could explain further, something slammed against the other side of the door so hard that dust rained from the ceiling. Another impact followed. Then another. Deep growls echoed only inches away. The princess instinctively stepped backward. The housekeeper whispered, "He can smell you." Those words chilled her more than the growls themselves. The attacks suddenly stopped. Silence returned. The princess slowly approached the small window overlooking the courtyard. Moonlight revealed the enormous wolf standing alone in the center of the castle grounds. Every guard remained hidden behind reinforced gates. None dared confront him. The beast lifted its head toward the moon before releasing a long, mournful howl unlike the terrifying cries she had heard before. There was pain in it. Loneliness. Anguish so deep that even the princess felt tears gathering in her eyes. She realized this was not the cry of a monster enjoying destruction. It was the cry of a man trapped inside a prison no chain could truly contain. Without thinking, she opened the window. The housekeeper spun around in alarm. "Close it," she whispered urgently. But it was too late. The wolf lowered its head. Its glowing eyes met hers. Instead of charging toward the tower, the creature simply stood there, watching her. Then, with slow, deliberate steps, it walked toward the castle wall directly beneath her window. Every guard held their breath. The princess should have stepped away. Instead, she remained where she was. The beast stopped below her. For several long seconds, they stared at one another. Then, before anyone could understand what was happening, the wolf slowly lay down on the cold stone, resting its enormous head upon its front paws. Like a loyal guardian. Not a predator. The entire courtyard fell silent. Even the soldiers looked at one another in confusion. No one had ever seen the beast behave that way. The housekeeper whispered so quietly the princess almost failed to hear it. "He has never spared anyone once the curse takes hold." The princess looked back down at the wolf. His breathing had become slower. His fierce golden eyes no longer burned with rage. Instead, they seemed almost peaceful. The moment lasted only seconds. A sharp cry suddenly echoed across the mountains. The wolf's ears snapped upright. Its head turned toward the distant forest. From beyond the castle walls came another howl. Then another. Dozens answered. The peaceful expression vanished instantly. The beast leaped to its feet, every muscle tense. The ground trembled beneath his weight. Without warning, he raced toward the northern gates with astonishing speed, crashing straight through solid oak as though it were made of paper. Within moments, he disappeared into the darkness. The castle erupted into chaos. Guards rushed after him. Messengers transformed into ravens and launched into the night sky. The housekeeper's face lost all color. "The border." "What border?" the princess asked. The older woman looked at her with genuine fear. "There are creatures far older than wolves waiting beyond those mountains." Before the princess could ask another question, one exhausted soldier burst into the room, falling to one knee. "Your Majesty," he gasped, struggling to catch his breath. "The northern seals have been broken." The housekeeper closed her eyes. "Then they have found us." The princess stared between them, her heart pounding. She had believed her greatest danger was the Wolf King. She was only beginning to understand that something even more powerful had been waiting patiently for the moment she entered his kingdom. And whatever had awakened beyond the northern mountains was coming, not for the king, but for his human bride. The alarm bells continued ringing until dawn, but no one in the castle slept. Every corridor remained filled with anxious whispers as soldiers rushed between towers carrying reports that only seemed to deepen everyone's fear. The princess stood near the highest balcony overlooking the northern mountains, watching thick clouds roll across the horizon. Somewhere beyond those endless forests, the Wolf King had disappeared into the darkness without a single guard capable of following him. Hours passed before the first raven returned. It landed heavily upon the stone railing before transforming into one of the royal messengers. His clothing was torn, his face marked with deep scratches, and exhaustion filled his golden eyes. He immediately dropped to one knee. "Your Majesty," he said to the princess, "His Majesty ordered us to return without him." She frowned in confusion. "Where is he?" The messenger hesitated before answering. "Holding the northern gate alone." Those words echoed through the balcony like a sentence no one wanted to hear. The housekeeper slowly stepped forward. "Then the prophecy has finally begun." The princess turned sharply toward her. "Stop speaking in riddles. Tell me the truth." For the first time since her arrival, no one tried to hide anything. The housekeeper guided her into a hidden chamber buried beneath the royal library. At its center rested an ancient stone table covered with maps, faded scrolls, and paintings far older than Ashbourne itself. One enormous mural stretched across the wall. It depicted a silver wolf standing beside a young woman whose eyes glowed with the same golden light as the moon above them. Around the pair stood humans, wolves, ravens, foxes, bears, and creatures unlike anything the princess had ever imagined, all kneeling before the same throne. Across the top of the mural were words written in an ancient language. The housekeeper gently traced the faded letters before translating them aloud. When moon and crown become one, the sleeping kingdom shall awaken. The bride shall tame the beast, and together they shall decide whether the world survives its oldest curse. The princess stared at the painting in disbelief. This woman, the housekeeper nodded. She was your ancestor. Before the princess could speak again, another voice answered from behind her. And you carry every drop of her blood. An elderly woman stepped from the shadows, dressed in robes woven from silver threads that shimmered like moonlight. Her long white hair reached her waist, yet her posture remained straight and powerful. Every servant in the room immediately lowered their heads. Even the housekeeper bowed deeply. The stranger introduced herself as the last moonkeeper, guardian of the oldest secrets in the kingdom. She explained that centuries earlier, humans and shapeshifters had ruled together until greed and fear divided them. Kings hungry for greater power hunted magical creatures across the continent, forcing the Wolf King's ancestors to retreat into the hidden northern kingdom. Before leaving, the first Wolf King forged a sacred covenant with one human queen whose compassion had saved his people from extinction. Their descendants were destined to reunite one day through marriage, ending generations of hatred between both worlds. But another force had waited just beyond the mountains, feeding upon every war, every betrayal, and every broken promise until it had become strong enough to challenge them all. The creature you fear is not your husband, the Moonkeeper said quietly. He has spent his entire life protecting this kingdom from something far worse. Before another word could be spoken, the castle shook violently. Dust fell from the ceiling as a deafening roar echoed across the mountains. Soldiers rushed into the chamber shouting that the northern walls had fallen. The princess raced outside with everyone else. High upon the cliffs overlooking the kingdom, a battle unlike anything she had ever imagined unfolded beneath the crimson sky. The Wolf King stood alone against a monstrous army emerging from the forests beyond the mountains. Some resembled towering wolves with burning red eyes, while others shifted constantly between monstrous forms that no human mind could fully understand. Serpentine beasts slithered through the trees before becoming armored giants. Massive birds transformed into warriors carrying black spears. Shadow-like creatures moved without leaving footprints, their glowing eyes fixed upon the kingdom below. At the center of them all stood a woman dressed in flowing black robes. Her beauty was striking, but her smile carried centuries of bitterness. She raised one hand toward the Wolf King. "You protected them long enough," she called. "Bring me the bride, and I will spare your kingdom." The Wolf King answered with a thunderous roar that echoed through every valley. His enormous silver form launched forward, crashing into the advancing creatures with such force that the mountains themselves seemed to tremble. The princess watched in horror as the battle raged across the cliffs. The Wolf King fought with unmatched strength, but every enemy he defeated was quickly replaced by two more. Blood stained his silver fur. Deep wounds covered his powerful body. Yet he refused to retreat even a single step toward the castle. "He cannot hold them forever," the Moonkeeper whispered. Without another thought, the princess ran toward the battlefield despite desperate cries for her to stop. Guards attempted to block her path, but wolves suddenly appeared from the forest and surrounded her without aggression. Instead of restraining her, they escorted her through hidden mountain passages until she emerged only a short distance from the fighting. The Wolf King immediately noticed her. His golden eyes widened with alarm. Forgetting every enemy around him, he rushed toward her. Before he could reach her, the woman in black appeared between them with impossible speed. "How touching," she said with a smile. "A monster willing to die for love." The stranger revealed herself as the first queen who had betrayed the ancient covenant centuries earlier. Refusing to accept peace between humans and magical creatures, She had embraced forbidden magic that granted her unnatural life in exchange for endless hatred. Every generation she had searched for the descendants of the original Wolf King and Human Queen, hoping to destroy the prophecy before it could unite both worlds again. She lifted her hand, sending waves of dark energy across the battlefield. Warriors from both sides were thrown through the air. Even the Wolf King struggled to remain standing. The princess realized that fear alone would never end this war. She remembered every moment since arriving in the kingdom. The mysterious white rose. The silent protection. The king chaining himself every full moon rather than allowing innocent people to suffer. Every act of kindness hidden beneath a terrifying appearance. She finally understood what her mother had meant before the wedding. Never let your heart become harder than your fear. Ignoring the danger before her, she walked toward the wounded Wolf King. His beastly form stood between her and the enemy, growling weakly despite his injuries. She gently placed her hand against his blood-stained face. "Look at me," she whispered. Slowly, the enormous wolf lowered his head until their foreheads touched. His breathing steadied. His glowing eyes softened. Then, before every warrior watching the battle, she kissed him. The crimson moon above them suddenly blazed brighter than ever before. Golden light surrounded them both. The Wolf King's body began changing, not into the human form she had seen before, but into something entirely new. Silver wings unfolded from his back. His crown shimmered with moonlight. At the same moment, the princess felt warmth flowing through every part of her body. Her own eyes turned brilliant gold. Delicate silver markings appeared across her hands, glowing like ancient runes awakened after centuries of silence. The prophecy had not been fulfilled through sacrifice. It had awakened through trust. The ancient queen screamed in fury as the light spread across the battlefield. One by one, the shadow creatures collapsed into dust. The monstrous wolves retreated toward the mountains. Ravens, foxes, bears, and wolves from the Hidden Kingdom stood together with human soldiers from Ashbourne, no longer separated by fear or suspicion. The Wolf King stepped beside his bride, their hands intertwined as they faced the ancient enemy together. With the last of her strength, the ancient queen attempted one final attack, but the combined power of the king and queen shattered the darkness surrounding her. Her scream echoed across the valleys before fading into silence, carried away by the wind. For the first time in centuries, the crimson moon slowly returned to its natural silver glow. Weeks later, the kingdoms celebrated a union unlike any in history. The people of Ashbourne crossed freely into the Northern Kingdom, discovering neighbors they had feared only because they had never truly known them. Shapeshifters walked openly beside humans without hiding their true nature. Children laughed as wolves played beside horses in palace gardens where war had once been expected. The princess and the Wolf King were crowned together before representatives of every kingdom, not as rulers of separate worlds, but as guardians of one united realm. The man who had once believed he should kill her before falling in love now looked at her with quiet gratitude every time their eyes met. She smiled each time, remembering that the greatest monsters are sometimes those carrying the deepest wounds, and that compassion has a way of reaching places even strength cannot. Years passed peacefully until one quiet evening beneath another full moon. The royal couple stood outside their palace, watching their young daughter chase glowing butterflies through the gardens. She laughed as she reached toward the moonlight. Suddenly, silver light surrounded her tiny body. Before either parent could move, the little girl transformed into a magnificent white wolf no larger than a deer. Brilliant silver wings unfolded gracefully from her back as she looked toward the sky with the same golden eyes both her parents shared. The Wolf King and his queen exchanged a silent glance. The ancient prophecy had ended, but another chapter had just begun. If you had been the princess, would you have trusted the Wolf King after discovering what he truly was, or would fear have sent you running? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoyed this unforgettable journey of love, sacrifice, and destiny, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next epic fantasy romance. Until next time, remember that sometimes the greatest love stories begin with the promise of destruction and end by changing the world forever.